So for the first auto layout example, we're going to center a subview at a specific X and Y percentage of its superview, and then have it scale with the aspect ratio of the width. So first I'm going to go over here, I'm just going to find a view. I'm going to downsize this. I'm going to go ahead and start it off with just 100 by 100, and we'll make it a nice pretty light green color. Okay, so we have a view. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to stick it in the center just as somewhere to start out with, because we are going to be using center constraints. So once it's centered, I'm going to hold down the control key, click in this view and drag out to this one. And then I'm going to select center horizontally in container. We're going to do the center one first. Now you'll notice it's complaining. It doesn't have a Y position and it doesn't have a width and a height. And so for now we're going to go ahead and give it placeholder ones just so that we can work with the other things. So I'm going to give it width and height of 100. We'll add those two, and I'm not going to add a Y one because we'll be doing Y shortly. So now that I've got this, I can go over here and see my constraints. I have my align X to superview. So right now we have a multiplier of 1 which sticks it right smack dab in the middle of the screen. Now the multipliers can be a little weird, but if you go up here and you click reverse first and second item, this gets a lot easier. So now that we've reversed them, it's actually out of 0 and 2. 0 being center on the very left of the screen and 2 being center on the very right of the screen. So if I do 2 as the multiplier, it's going to say I'm in the wrong place by 160 pixels, so I can click on this, go down here and hit update frames, and it's going to move it up here. Now we didn't set a Y constraint, so jump back to the top. Something interesting though is if we do 0 to try to get it on the very left, is you can't actually do 0 as a multiplier, at least not in Interface Builder. So you technically end up with something that's kind of a limit. You can do 0.0001 and it'll do it. Occasionally it'll crash when you do that many zeros, but we'll see if we can test our luck. Oh, wrong button. So we'll update our frames, and it'll get over here. So it's not technically correct, but it's a limit as you approach 0. And if you get close enough to 0, it's going to round you to the appropriate location. Now, I'm going to be putting it exactly a third of the way down the screen and a third of the way over. And so in order to do that, I said this was out of 2. And so what you want to do is you want to take 2 and we'll divide it by 3, and that'll give us 33% of the way across 2, which is 0.666. So I'm going to click this, I'm going to change our multiplier to 0.66, press enter, and then go click over here and update our frames again. And it's centered exactly 1/3 of the way across the screen. So, excuse me, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to do it vertically. So we're going to drag another line out here, say center vertically, and it's going to have it preset with a constant because we don't have it in the center of the screen, so we'll set that constant back to 0. We're going to go up here, we'll reverse the first and second item again so that our origin is at the top and our 2 is at the very bottom. And we're going to do 66% here as well, so we'll change our multiplier, or excuse me, we'll do 1/3 across, which is 0.66 as well. And so now we're exactly centered 1/3 of the way down the screen. So if you haven't tried this yet, if you turn on your assistant editor and go down here to preview, you can do this without working in the simulator. And so I can add devices of different sizes. I've got a 4-inch and a 5.5, we can add 4.7. And you can see what these look like. So you can see it's centered exactly 1/3 across and 1/3 down on the screen of both the 4, the 5.5, and the 4.7. So the next thing I want is to scale the aspect ratio because I may not always want it to be exactly 100 by 100 on every screen. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to drag over to this view and I'm going to say equal widths. Now, it's going to try to make this equal widths centered on 1/3 across. You'll notice it's giant over here on our preview, which isn't what we want at all. So I'm going to click on the equal width constraint, and I'm going to change its multiplier. I'm going to change it to 0.25, so it's exactly 1/4 of the width of the screen. And so now I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to press, wrong button, update frames. And that's kind of odd shaped because now it's not proportional anymore, so I'm going to change this thing's height to 80 to match our iPhone 5S in Interface Builder. And then I'm going to select the view, go down here and check mark aspect ratio so it maintains aspect ratio. Now it's not happy about something, and that would be that we still have our width and height constraints that we were using for temporary. So we'll delete those, and now it's just not happy because we're not in the right place. So we'll go down here and we'll have it update our frames again, and now everything's good. So we'll go back over here into our preview, and we'll notice that over here it's 80 by 80, which is 1/3 of, or excuse me, 1/4 of 320. Over here it's larger, and I didn't do the math, and over here it's larger but still a little smaller than the 5.5. So this is how you position something at a specific percentage of X and Y and have the width and height scale respecting aspect ratio and the size of the screen. Spacer views feel a little hacky, but Apple does show them in a WWDC video that's showing you about auto layout. So you can probably get a little bit more in-depth information there, but this should give you a quick overview. Now, unlike widths and heights and dimensions, spacing can't be dynamic. You can't relate one spacing to another spacing, and although you can specify a percentage of something, you can't make it grow proportionally, things like that. For that, you need spacer views. So I'm going to start by adding some buttons here. What we're actually going to try to build is 3 buttons that are equally spaced. They stay the same size, but the spacing between them will grow as the screen size grows. So we're going to put 3 buttons on here, and change them a little bit so that we know which one's which. And the last one's right. So over here we'll make all of these, and I've predetermined these numbers to work out well. So we're going to give them a width of 76, height of 30 is fine, and I'm going to give them a background color so we can see where they end. Oh, use one of these quick ones. There we go. I'm going to line them all up. And because I do want these to stay a fixed size, I'm going to select them all and come down here and tell them they're going to stay width of 76 and a height of 30. So we don't have any constraints on them yet, so you'll see they're trying to locate themselves up here. We're about to try and stop that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to figure out the amount of space between them. So we're going to do equal space on the left, between them, and on the right. So that's 4 equal spaces we need. So we'll take the width of the 5S screen and interface builder that we're working with, and we'll subtract 3 times 76, which gives us 92. We'll divide 92 by 4, and that comes out to a nice 23, as I was hoping. So the next thing we need to do is we actually need to line these up perfectly ourselves for the 5S, and then we can start putting in spacer views. So I'm going to go ahead and put this one over. I'm actually going to move all these down to be centered. So we'll put this one over at x equals 23, and this should be right, but just to be sure, we'll do 23 plus 76 plus another 23, 122. Yep, that's right. And then we'll do 122 plus 76 plus 23. So that comes out to 221. So now these are all equally spaced. Now they won't stay that way, and they don't have any constraints on them right now, so technically they're not even actually in this position. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to set up the kind of the Y and the width and the height. And just to keep this simple so I don't have to constrain everything, I'm going to constrain this just to have, well, I guess I'll do it over here since it doesn't want to do both. So we'll do center horizontally and vertically, and then we'll tell all these just to maintain a center Y. So if we ever do decide to move this, then they'll still work. Now you can see it's got everything down here. Still trying to throw it to the left since we don't have anything kind of constraining the X axis, so that's what we're about to fix. So we're going to grab some regular UI views here, nothing special about them, and I'm going to go ahead and turn these light gray so we can see them, and I'm going to make these the same height, which is just a nicety, it's not required, and then I'm going to make them the width that we want, which is 23. And I'm going to need 4 of these, so 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm going to stick this over here. I'm going to stick this one right here perfectly between the two. And I'm going to stick this one over here perfectly between the two, and this one over here on the edge. Now, it's about to get really messy what we're about to do, so I'll try to go slowly and explain exactly what I'm doing, because there's going to be a lot of constraints here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I want these to always be the same size. Now that doesn't mean that they're a fixed size. They're not always going to be 23 wide. It just means that I want them to always be the same size as each other. So I'm going to bind this one to this one and say you're going to be equal width. I'm going to do this one to this one and say you're going to be equal width, and this one to this one. Now I like to do them kind of left to right so they're all connected to each other, but you could relate them all back to a single one. So like I could have done this one to each of the other three. It doesn't really matter. They're all going to stack up against each other. And once we have that, we need to do on the side ones, they need to stick to the left and the right of the screen. So we'll take this one and we will do its leading constraint to its superview. And on this one, we will do its trailing space to the right edge of the superview. Now these aren't bounded by Y right now. So we're going to need to bind these on Y. So we're going to center these as well. So we'll do center Y, and we'll do center Y. I'm just going to connect all these to that center one. So center Y, center Y. And we need to give these heights. So we'll do equal heights, and then we'll do equal height. Now the equal height part doesn't have anything to do with the spacing. It just keeps it, one, pretty, and two, make sure we satisfy the height constraint of these views. So it looks like right now everything is blowing up in our face. There's a bunch of things wrong. A ton of errors will show up over there, but they will all go away as we finish. So what we've done, this one is stuck to the left side of the screen. This one is stuck to the right side of the screen. They're all told to be equal to each other. And now we need to get their spacings to their neighbor buttons set up. So we'll control click, we'll drag a line from this one to this one and say respect your horizontal spacing, from this to this and say respect your horizontal spacing, from here to here, from here to here, from here to here, from here to here. Now all of our errors are gone. So let's see if we actually did this correctly. So let's open up preview and take a peek over here. So we've got a 4-inch iPhone, we've got a 5.5 inch and a 4.7. So you can see the buttons are all the same size, but the space between the buttons grows equally all the way across the screen. Now, cool enough is you can actually, if I did this right, so this is the equal width to that view, this is the one to that view. So I can edit this one, and I can actually modify this since I did them in a chain, so I could say 0.5, and that's going to break a bunch of things, which you would need to fix normally, but you can come over and kind of see its impact over here, is that we made this one 0.5 times, these over here to the right, 0.5 times this one over here. And so these still all had to stay the same size because of the constraints, but they're exactly half the size of the one over here, just because we chained them together, and this is the one where we started the 0.5 trend and it kind of carried through. So I'm going to change that back to 1. Not something you're probably ever going to need to do, but the power is there. Now, I've really screwed this up, so I'm going to go select all these, and I'm going to say update frames, and they're going to put them all back in the calculated positions. For the third auto layout example, we're going to be doing a close to full screen text view and resizing it using constraints when the keyboard opens and closes. Now this isn't going to quite be a full screen text view like the commenter asked for, and I apologize for that. I just needed a place to put a close button at the top of the screen, so pardon me on that. But the principle is the same and it would work exactly the same. So we're going to go down and we're going to grab a button first, and let's just get this button out of the way. Button, close. I'm going to stick it up here and give it fixed width and height, then we'll just glue it up to the top right. So top space, trailing space. There we go. So that's out of the way. Now we're going to do a text view, add it on screen. We will dock it at the bottom, which is what's important for what we're about to do. If it's not at the very bottom, you'll need some slight changes to your math, but I think most of you guys can figure that one out. So next thing we're going to do is set up our constraints. So we'll do leading, trailing, top, bottom. So that's fixing to the left, fixing to the top, fixing to the right, and fixing to the bottom. So those spaces will always be equal. So we'll let go of that. Now, since I'm going to be demonstrating how to animate with the keyboard in auto layout, I want to see what happens when the animation is wrong or not working. So I'm going to change the background view color to gray. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the assistant editor so that I can see my M file. I need to close the keyboard, so I'm going to go ahead and drag this down here and say close keyboard, connect. And if you usually use resign first responder, that's fine if you know the exact text field you want to close or if you've got a return key. But you can also do kind of a global end editing, and it'll end editing of any kind for the keyboard on screen. So in that case, that's what I'm going to do here. Now, just so it doesn't even have the chance of cheating, I'm not even going to link the text view to a variable. So it's just going to kind of exist. Now, of course, in order to make practical use of this and to get the text out of it, you will need it. But to prove that I'm doing this entirely with constraints and not with actually accessing the text view, I wanted to show you how. Now, in order to do this in code, since the keyboard opening notification is in code, you do need to have access to the constraints. So we'll go over here. I'm going to find my bottom layout one, which is this one. And I actually didn't know this until a little ways into my auto layout experience, but you can actually connect constraints over in code from Interface Builder just like you can views. So I'm going to call this text view bottom space to container. And there we have a constraint. So I'm going to go back over here, and before iOS 8 you basically just needed to implement keyboard will show, keyboard will hide, and occasionally the did show and did hide. In iOS 8 keyboards can change size, and so you need to implement for sure will change frame or did change frame if you weren't already. Really, you should have been doing it before, but definitely more important now. Now, what a lot of people didn't necessarily notice is that you can do it with only implementing will change frame. And that's what we're going to do here so that we don't have a lot of keyboard code in a lot of places. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the notification so that my view controller is listening. So notification center, default center, add observer, self, selector, and we'll make one up and we'll call it update text view position for keyboard. And it'll be UI keyboard, what was it? UI keyboard frame, it will change frame. Sorry about that. Will change frame notification. And we'll just use nil for an object. Now, before you implement this, if you haven't already, make sure somewhere, definitely in Dialog at the minimum, you have removed your observer. Because if ARC removes your view controller from memory when you're done with it, and you ever open a keyboard again, it's going to crash when it can't find your view controller. So always, if you use NS Notification Center observer on an object, remove it from Notification Center in your dealloc method, or somewhere that it's guaranteed to hit before ARC picks it up. So now we'll go on to implementing our method. Excuse me. So update view, oops, this is view, text view, there we go, update text view position for keyboard, NS notification, note. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to get the duration and the animation curve. So NS time interval, and we'll pull out the duration equals note.userinfo UI keyboard frame end user info key, and we'll get that as a double value so that it's in NS time interval, and then we'll get a UI view animation curve note.user info. Get UI keyboard animation curve user info key, and we'll get this as an integer value because animation curves are actually integers. Now, fun fact is that the keyboard animation curve is actually a private API. It does exist as a definition just like the other animation curves, but if you use it, you'll get flagged. So this is the technically correct way to get that animation curve, and it makes your animations a lot prettier. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the end frame of the keyboard. So cgrect, and then we'll get keyboard end frame, and we'll do note.userinfo UI keyboard. Oh, dang it, I just realized I did that up there. So put that there, and then you change that one. UI keyboard animation duration user info key. Ah, that was about bad. Sorry about that, guys. And then since this is an NS value, we'll get the cgrect value. Now, this is in the window coordinate space, and we need to convert it to our view coordinate space. Although, in this case, they should basically be the same. It is good practice to go ahead and convert it regardless, because you never know if you would ever reuse your view elsewhere. So we'll go ahead and convert it. So we'll do self.view convert rect keyboard end frame from view, and now you could pass the window if you wanted because it's a UI view subclass, or you can just do nil and it'll pull it out of the global space for the window. Now, this next part, a lot of people that I've talked to have wanted to, right here, instead of using self.view, use the text view. This can run you into, one, some math problems, but two, some coordinate space and layout issues. So whatever is the super view of your text view that's containing it, go ahead and use that here. That way you can do your constraints relative to their container, which is what we're doing here. Since our constraint is tied to our container, we should know the keywords in the container and then base our math off of where the keyboard ended up in the container. Because if your text view isn't touching the bottom of the screen, it's entirely possible you may not need to adjust the keyboard location here. If you have a really tall keyboard, you may need to adjust it. If you have a really short one, you may not. And so it's really good to do it in the parent of your text view. So now that we've got it in the parent of the text view, we can go ahead and change our constant on our layout constraints. So self.textView bottom space container.constant equals, in this case, cgrect get max y, and we will get self.view.bounds since we are in that coordinate space, and then we will subtract that. So subtract the origin from the height of our view, which will give us how far from the bottom our constraint needs to push our text view up. So this is going to come out to something like, I think 216 is one of the default heights. And so this will be effectively like 568 minus 300 and something, and it's going to yield 216, and so 216 will be the distance between the bottom of the text view and the bottom of the super view instead of the current 0. And so that'll give the effect of pushing your text view up and making it smaller. So I'm going to do this without animations first, just so you can see what happens. And it'll mark these as, not being used. So let's go ahead and run this. Run. And so right there you just saw that. Right there. See that gray in the background? It immediately changed, but our keyboard animated in. And that's no fun. But, I mean, you can tell it is correct. So, I mean, it did go to the right place. You can see it right on the bar spaced correctly. And if we change this, then our text view goes up with it because the bounds changed, and it'll go back down. So it is correct. I'll close it and it'll jump back down. So animation would make this a lot better looking. So let's go ahead and animate it. Now this is one place where I told you it might look a little weird. Some of you might roll your eyes at this. Block-based UI view animations. Animate with duration. We have our with duration, and we have our options. Now one thing I want you to notice over here is the options where you specify the curve are UI view animation options, not UI view animation curves. And so if I actually wanted to do a curve and block animations, I need UI view animation options, option curve, ease and out, as compared to the older way of UI view animation curve, ease and out. So you notice it's missing the word option. Now, if I can't use it with block animations, what are you supposed to use it with? Now, some of these actually overlap with each other, and so you might be able to get away with using this, but it's not technically the correct way to do it. We need to go back to the older kind of inline way of doing this, where you're not working in blocks, you're actually beginning an animations set, and then you're closing it. So we're going to begin an animation, we're going to set animation duration, and we'll use our duration, and we'll use our animation curve, and notice that's the correct type, UI view animation curve, UI view animation curve. So we'll set curve. And now one thing when you're animating auto layout is that you have to call layout if needed in a block or in this mechanism for it to actually work. So we'll do self.view layout if needed, and then we'll do commit animations. So let's run that. So now you'll see it animated up correctly, and you didn't see the gray background. And we have proof that it actually went up because you can see the little scroll bar on the right. And it animates up with that instead of snapping, and animates down with that. And then we close it, and it animates back down. And that's so much nicer. And it's one of the subtle things that knowing how to do the animation correctly is. Now, this isn't 100% in auto layout, but it does use auto layout, and it's really a one-line thing to update the constraint. And if you don't have to implement will show, did show, update frame, it really comes down to what's that? 31 to 48, so like 18 lines or so, or less, of code needed to support the keyboard. And of course, just because I've been showing the storyboard preview and the rest of them, this is what it would effectively look like on all the other screens. And if you want proof this works on other screens, I'll boot up the 6 Plus. And we're going to make that smaller. And so we have this here. It has to scroll a little bit, so sorry about that. And we will open that and jump down. And there we go. See? All docked on the right, and it'll change heights with this. And we can close it, and it'll go right back. And so it supports all screen sizes, it supports all animation heights, even changing heights, and it's all done with auto layout and one line of layout code. For our fourth auto layout tutorial, we're going to be doing scroll views with content, with the scroll views content size property automatically adjusting to our content size contained within it. Now, before we get started on that, there is something I need to show you about how the iPhone 6 handles margins that is going to look a little weird if I don't give you a little explanation up front. So, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this background light gray so we can see it different from the view I'm about to make. Now, this is before the scroll view tutorial, so just kind of ignore me in the scroll view front. This is just an example to show you something. So, I'm going to go and set up the leading, trailing, top, bottom. Which would mean we expect this to stick, and we should only see white, we should not see any gray. So I'm going to run it on an iPhone 5S. And once it boots, you'll see it worked. It did exactly what we expected. I'll run it on an iPhone 6. And once it boots, you'll see it worked as well. It's just white. Now, when we run it on an iPhone 6 Plus is where you're going to see a problem. There we go. So you'll see over on the left and right, there's the tiniest bits of gray. That's because the margins for the view or view controller, I'm not exactly sure, are different on the iPhone 6 Plus. Now, I think this is just to make it look a little bit visually more coherent, to inset things a little further, take a little bit better advantage of the screen. However, I'm not actually aware of how to account for this in Interface Builder. I know you can do it in code. but I don't want to steer you in the wrong direction. So whenever we run our example with our scroll view on here, you're going to see the content scaled correctly with the width of the screen. However, since the scroll view didn't, it technically will scroll a little bit horizontally because the content's bigger than the scroll view frame. If anyone knows the correct fix for this, not just a way to fix this, I would appreciate a comment kind of informing us, but it won't impact us actually building our scroll view or how that would work in a situation where you didn't have this light gray margin problem. So with that out of the way, let's build a scroll view. Now what we're going to build is probably better suited as a table view, but for this example I think it'll work just fine. We're going to build something that's kind of like a form. The content is going to scale to the width of the screen. The height is always going to be the same, and it's going to be bigger than the screen, so it will scroll. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a scroll view on screen. Scroll view. And we're going to set up the same constraints we did on our test a second ago, and which means it will have the problem. Now, if you're thinking checkmark equal widths and heights, don't do it. It will blow up in console with where it can't satisfy constraints. So don't do these. The next thing we want to do is go up here to our view controller, and we need to change it from inferred or 4-inch. I usually work at 4-inch, and we need to change it to freeform. Now, because I've done this before to make sure I knew exactly what I was telling you, 878 is the height I'm going to use for this thing. Now, it can be any height. You can make it really large and then make your content and then resize it later. I just know that 878 is what's going to work for what I'm doing. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pull out a label, and I'm going to pull out a text view, and I'm going to pop this right up here, just kind of somewhere down here, and then I'm going to set this label and put it right here, and put that up a bit. So I'm going to copy and paste this. I think 6 times is what I did in my example. So there we go, perfect. Right now you put these in the scroll view, and this is probably what you thought whenever you first started would be the way we're going to go. But you actually need these in a containing view. And so I'm going to go up here in editor, and I'm going to say embed in view. Now, unfortunately, it's not the correct size, so we need to update the size. So I'm going to make it 320 wide, which is our screen, 878 tall, and then 0, 0, and that's going to get us right back where we should have been. So there we are. And I think it actually moved our content down, or excuse me, up a little bit, so we're going to bump this down. There we go. I'm also going to change the background color of these just so you can see them a little bit better and differentiate the frames. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is work my way in. So the scroll view calculates the content boundaries by constraints placed upon it from a subview inside of it. It's actually kind of a little weird. It's got an engineering note. I'm going to do leading, trailing, top, and bottom, but it's going to use these to calculate edges, not to actually bind things to them. And so your view here is still ambiguous. It doesn't have anything it can hard press against to get a size. It's still essentially undefined for the purposes of sizing. This is just telling the scroll view how to find content edges. So you do need to attach it to something else. Luckily, we can attach it to something outside of the scroll view. So we're going to attach it to our main view. And we don't need to do these. We need to do the widths and the height. Or excuse me, not the height. The height's going to be determined automatically. We need to do the width so that our form will be the full width of our screen, and the height will be determined by all the auto layout spacings, and then ultimately that will determine the size of the content view. So equal widths. Now the next thing I need to do is do a ton of just basic layout stuff here to get all these things lined up. So I'm going to go down here and add these as fast as I can for you. So I'm going to select all of these, and I'm going to say I need to make sure they're a certain width and height, since I don't want these to resize. You could, I don't want them to. And then I'm going to say they need to be 20 from the left and 8 from the things on the right, their nearest neighbor, which would be their text views. And I'm going to add 24 constraints that we didn't have to do all at once. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is go through and align these center Y. It's just an offset, so not anything huge to worry about. And I'll show you one of these constraints so you can know what it's exactly doing. There are other ways you could do this, such as aligning tops. I'm doing centers just because it's quick and easy. So let me find one of these. So center Y to label. So it's just a regular align center and then shift it by 54. So our label is technically 54 from the center. Again, not a huge deal, but it's there. Now for these, we need to attach them to the right of the screen. So, wrong button. So they're 10 from the edge of the screen, so we'll add 6 constraints. And then this top one needs to be attached to its container, top space. This one needs to be attached to its container to the bottom space. And then we need to get the vertical space in between them. So drag, vertical, drag, vertical, drag, vertical. Okay, so we now have something. So what's still wrong? Well, these don't know their heights, so let's give them some heights. Heights of 128. And magically, all of our warnings over here go away. Everything turns bright blue. So, unfortunately, this is not something that previews well in Interface Builder. Let me pop it open so you can see the preview. So you'll see what the content will look like, but you won't actually see, how it behaves in scrolling, unfortunately. So I'm going to close that. But you see how the content should technically look. So let's load it up on a 5S and see what happens. Okay, so it looks like it's scaled correctly, which isn't too much of a feat since that's how we designed it at this resolution. So these scroll. Probably not a great decision to put a scrolly thing inside of a scroll view, but we did. And so you can see this main content view, the size is determined by all the elements inside of it and equal width to the main view. The scroll view has those constraints attached so it can find the top, left, right, and bottom boundaries, and it uses that to compute the content size and where it is. And so automatically scrolls to the correct height. You can see the edge there, and we can see our gray background view. So the bigger test is, will this work on an iPhone 6 and 6 Plus? On an iPhone 6, this should work perfectly fine. It should be equivalent to the 5S. Yeah, so it got wider like we wanted for all these text views, and it scrolls just like we wanted, so it correctly calculated our content size. And again, there was no code backing this, entirely auto layout constraints. So the next thing is the 6 Plus, and you remember the problem I showed you at the beginning with the margins. You're going to see that here. And I made my screen resolution smaller to record this video, and the 6 Plus doesn't really fit here, but this should still work. So you can see we have our gray margin on the left, our gray margin on the right. Now you may first glance look and say, hey, our spacing on the right isn't correct. That's not 10 pixels or 10 points, and you're exactly right. It's not. And so our white view is actually the size of the screen. The scroll view is not, which means I can scroll it horizontally. Because the constant size is bigger than the scroll view frame, which means it did calculate the bounds correctly. So our white view and all of the contents scaled correctly. The scroll view did not, but everything else did. So technically the scroll view part of this example worked, just not the constraints between the scroll view and the main view. But, like I said, you can still see the basics of it work, and if someone has a fix for the little margins on the 6 Plus, I would love to hear that in the comments. So this is how to do auto-sizing content in scroll views using only auto layout and no code. Okay, now for the 5th and last auto layout tutorial for today. So what we're going to try to do is have auto layout turned on for your view with views being laid out via auto layout and a view created in code not using auto layout. And so we're going to try to mix auto layout and not auto layout in the same view. So first I'm going to create just a basic layout so that we have something to work with. I've added a few pictures that we'll be using, some nice free royalty-free things, a badge, and a nice pretty free sneakers picture. So over here I'm going to create something that's kind of like the basics of a post. So label, so I'm going to grab a label, I'm going to grab an image, and then we'll duplicate the label. So I'm going to bump this right here. We'll give it a nice title. And I'm going to make this 250 by 250. And we'll stick this right over under here. And we're going to put this here, and we'll bump this down a little. And change this to light gray. We'll just make this like a byline. One thing I haven't been pointing out about labels is this preferred width. If you're targeting iOS 7 or previous, you should checkmark explicit. This just means you'll have to adjust your preferred width in code on iOS 7 and 8 because iOS 7 can't do this automatically, and you'll get an interface builder warning. I've been completely omitting that, expecting most people have probably seen the warnings, but while I'm here, checkmark that if you're working on iOS 7. So now I'm going to set up the auto layout constraints on this. So leading, trailing, and top. And then we need to give that a fixed height. It can't compute it from the text, but in this case I want it fixed. In this case we're going to say we want the aspect ratio to stay respected, so it stays square. And then we're going to say to the super view we want it to say centered vertically, or excuse me, centered horizontally. And then we're going to relate this to awesome sneakers and tell it to keep the vertical spacing. And then down here we're going to make this a specific height, and we're going to give it to the super view leading and trailing, so left and right. And then here it's going to have vertical spacing. Now it's still complaining because this doesn't really have a height, it's just 1-to-1. So we're going to attach it to the leading and trailing so that it will grow proportionally with the screen, and as it grows it's going to shove our image byline further down the page. So we've got this all set up, and I'm going to go over here, and in our M file I'm going to connect the image view. So what we're going to be doing with the non-auto layout image of the badge is we're going to put it right down here in the corner, the bottom right corner. So let's hop out of that and go straight into the code. So I'm going to add a property. Badge. So there's two places that you can create your badge. I would imagine most people know this, and this isn't the point of what I'm going to show you, but I just wanted to point this out in case anyone was ever curious or just did what they did. So await from nib and view did load. I like doing it in await from nib, but it does have some side effects. So await from nib is when your view controller has been created from the interface builder file, but your view hasn't been inflated or loaded yet. So all of your outlets are nil, so you really can't work with them. But it's a great place to create other things like your badge. It's a nice way to divide it as well, because I like doing configuration and setup in view did load and getting all of the hairy code created views elsewhere. It's just nice and clean to me. However, the second you do something like self.view add subview, you have forced it to load your view. Now if you're doing a view controller and you're about to immediately present it, this isn't really a problem because that's what you're going to do. But if you're creating a view controller and you don't need to present it right away, this causes a problem because you've just loaded a view and all of its images and all of its layout and everything else and invoked view did load and set up any listeners or notification center observers. You've just created a lot of overhead that you didn't need. So it isn't always correct to create things in await from nib. But I do like going ahead and setting up my resources here just so they don't clutter up my view did load. Unless, of course, I'm not going to show the view controller immediately. So there are people who are kind of on both sides of this fence. I know some people that only do it in view did load. I know a lot of people that'll separate them into the two like I do. In any case, just letting you know why I'm doing it here and not in view did load. So we'll create our image view. Init with image named badge. So this is the offending line that if you run this is going to automatically load your view and call view did load because we access self.view. So we'll add our badge. There we go. So now it's on screen. It doesn't have a position or any layout. You want to do your layout in view did layout subviews. So super view did layout subviews, we call that. And we have an aspect ratio of 1:1, so our picture is always going to be a square, but I'm going to set this up to work with rectangles as well. So I'm going to go ahead and say badge width, and we'll determine 25% of the shortest side so we don't accidentally make it too big. So we're going to do cgrect get width self.imageview.frame, or excuse me, bounds is greater than cgrect get height self.imageview.bounds, and if it is, then we'll use the shorter side, which will be height, and if the width is smaller, then we'll use the width. So now I'm going to use 25% of the dimension, so equals int, and then I'm going to just seal this so that it's a whole number, and we'll do badge width times 0.25, and now we'll come down and we'll do self.badge.frame equals cgrect make. Now remember that if you have any transforms applied, the frame property is undefined. You shouldn't set or get it. You should use bounds and center, but since we're not in that case, I'm going to go ahead and do it as frame. So we have our x, and our x is going to be cgrect get max x, so our rightmost x dimension of the image view frame, and then we're going to subtract our badge width so that our badge is on the image. So cgrect get max y self.imageview.frame, again minus our badge width so that it's on screen, or excuse me, on the image, and then badge width again. Now let's run it and see what happens. On our 5S, I would expect this to work because that's, of course, what we did in Interface Builder. So, oh, looks like I forgot to actually set our picture. So let's pick our sneakers. Come on, there we go. All right, so let's run it again. Okay, so on our sneakers. So let's try running it on the 6 Plus. See what happens. Hey, see, there we are. Cool. So this is being positioned without auto layout in an auto layout environment. Now, I'm going to point out a couple places where you can have problems because that's likely where our commenter had an issue. So for the purposes of that, I'm going to actually take this out and do what a lot of people do and do up here. So we have this. I'm going to grab where we're computing our frame and comment this out. And I'm going to do it up here. A lot of people, especially before we had resizable screens, set their frames in view did load. Not a great practice. So right now I'm going to show you what happens if you do this in view did load. It goes right here. It looks like it's in the wrong place, it's the wrong size. In fact, it's actually in the correct place and the correct size. It is in the iPhone 5S where we created it in Interface Builder. Because at this point, although our view is loaded and is the correct size, auto layout hasn't done a layout cycle yet, so it's going with the original values from Interface Builder. And a lot of people also update layout in view will layout subviews, which is the corollary to what we just used of view did layout subviews. And if you do the same thing, so still put it in a layout method after we call super, of course, you'll see that it's still going to do the iPhone 5S thing where it's up here. The reason is that, again, auto layout hasn't run yet. This is before will layout subview, so it's about to do auto layout. And that's why we put it in did, because then it's after auto layout runs. This also works for if you rotate the screen. So I don't know if rotating it's going to push this off the bottom. Yeah, it did. But if you could see it, you would be really happy to know that it actually did resize and lay out correctly. I think this button crashes Xcode half the time. Let's see. Don't crash, don't crash. There we go. Okay, so you can see, if you haven't used this tool, by the way, great debugging tool for view hierarchies, kind of like reveal. So you can see, even though our iPhone screen, no, go where I want. There we go, that's pretty square. So this is our screen. You can see where we were clipping right here at the bottom, and you can see where down here our view was being laid out. And so some perspective 3D makes it a little bit hard to see. Let me see, zoom out. So you can see it did lay out correctly, and our image view got giant. That's probably nearly 700 by 700 square. But our label down here worked. Our image view got bigger and stayed proportional. This got bigger and stayed in the correct location. And you'll notice our memory up here is giant because the picture I pulled is really high resolution. I don't recommend that. And then it's being rendered, of course, at like 700 by 700 at 3x. So be careful about that. So down here, not too hard. Like I said, the biggest thing is make sure you do it in view did layout subviews, because then it captures rotation, it captures any other view size changes, it captures after auto layout runs rather than before. So pretty straightforward. The only other thing that you need to remember is where we talked about the set auto resizing mask translation. And just because it took me 2 tries to record this video properly, I don't remember if I actually mentioned it and gave the proper information. So this is what's doing the magic. Like I said, if I already said this, feel free to skip this part of the video, but I'm going to say it again. Set translates auto resizing mask into constraints, yes. This is basically a giant off switch for auto layout. So the previous version of layout before constraints were auto resizing masks. Whenever this is turned on, which is yes, it reverts back to the old resizing mask system and internally translates that into constraints so that the resizing masks can work in an auto layout environment. So yes to this property turns off auto layout for this view effectively. Whenever you create a view in code, this is already set to yes by default. Auto layout is not turned on for views you create in code by default. However, it is on by default in Interface Builder. So if your Interface Builder document supports auto layout, all of the views created in Interface Builder will have this property set to no instead of yes. And so depending on if you created it in code or Interface Builder, this will have a different default. If I change this to no, this turns auto layout on for this view, and I need to provide constraints. So again, since it's defaulted, that's why I didn't have to have it. If I had made this image view in Interface Builder and then just worked with the layout of it, I would need to set that to yes so that I could use frames, bound, center, etc. So that's all I've got for my 5 auto layout videos today. If you have any questions, feel free to PM me on Reddit. I am Brendan09, and you can comment on the post on Reddit that this is. So thanks for watching, and I hope you guys got something out of this.